What if a mail-order groom's rejection turns into a fight for justice? You're Elijah Ford. The words landed heavy, like the first clap of thunder before a storm. Rebecca Hughes stood beneath the overhead lights of the Greyhound station in Colton Creek, Wyoming, eyes wide, bouquet trembling in her hands. Around them, the muted bustle of passengers and soft engine hums offered no comfort, no distraction. Elijah's heart, steady through 2 tours in Afghanistan and a lifetime of holding himself together, stuttered. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping back. This isn't what I expected." Elijah didn't move. He didn't blink. The corners of his lips twitched, but no smile came. "What exactly did you expect?" he asked, voice low. Even Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it again. Her face, flushed with color moments ago, now turned pale beneath the fluorescent glow. "You didn't mention," she gestured toward him vaguely, cowardly. "That I'm black," Elijah said for her, not harshly, but with the weight of a man too tired for pretense. She nodded once, stiff and ashamed. People around them had started to notice. A uniformed bus driver paused beside the vending machines. A mother holding her son's hand slowed her steps. It wasn't a fight. No yelling, no tears, but something deeper, something uncomfortable, a spectacle because it was public and because Elijah's skin made it political. "You wrote beautiful letters," she said quietly. "So proper." "I just thought that I couldn't be black and articulate," Elijah finished. Rebecca looked away. "It's not personal," she added quickly. "It's just Colton Creek isn't used to this kind of difference." There it was. The word difference, the velvet glove over the iron fist. Elijah exhaled slowly. The cold air bit at his lungs, but he welcomed it. It kept him grounded. What if a stranger's offer changes his destiny? "I came here because you said you were looking for something real," he said. "I thought maybe you were too." She pressed the bouquet into his hands like a transaction. "I'm sorry. I'll pay for your return ticket." "I didn't mean to waste your time." He accepted the flowers, though he didn't look at them. "You didn't waste my time, Rebecca. You wasted your own." He turned to walk away, boots echoing on the damp pavement. He didn't look back. Outside the station, snow flurries danced beneath the orange glow of the parking lot lights. Elijah sat alone on a metal bench, duffel bag at his feet, bouquet discarded beside him. The wind had a Wyoming bite, dry, merciless. His phone buzzed. A message from his landlord in Georgia. "Rent late again. Need an answer by the weekend." He silenced it. "Not now. Elijah Ford." The voice didn't come from above. It came from beside him. Confident, mature. A woman's voice grounded like earth and bourbon. He turned. She was maybe mid-40s, tall, silver in her hair, but not in her eyes. She wore a charcoal coat, tailored and sharp, and boots meant for fields, not fashion. "I'm Margot Delaney," she said, offering a gloved hand. "I was inside. Saw what happened." Elijah didn't take her hand. "Was it a good show?" "It was a disgrace," she replied, not missing a beat. "Not on your part." He studied her face. There was sympathy there, yes, but also something rarer, respect. I run Delaney Acres about 12 miles outside town, she continued. I'm looking for someone to manage our veteran outreach program, housing, farming, restoration. I think you might be the right fit. Elijah laughed short and bitter. Lady, I just got dumped before the first date. You think I'm in any shape to run anything? I think, she said calmly, you're exactly the kind of man this place has tried to ignore for too long. He blinked. That landed somewhere between flattery and truth, and it unsettled him more than Rebecca's rejection had. Why me? Because you didn't yell. You didn't grovel. You stood there and took the weight without crumbling. That tells me more than any resume. Elijah shook his head. I don't want a handout. Margot smiled just barely. This isn't charity. It's purpose. You can come by tomorrow morning or you can stay here and freeze with your pride. Up to you. She handed him a business card and walked away, heels crunching against frozen gravel. That night, Elijah didn't sleep much. He found an old motel on the edge of town, the kind with buzzing lights and carpets that held stories. The room smelled like disinfectant and hopelessness. He laid on the bed fully clothed, duffel bag under his head like a soldier on watch. At 4:43 a.m., he sat up and stared at the card. Margot Delaney, CEO Delaney Acres, organic, sustainable, veteran-driven, established 1971. There was no flourish, no gold emboss, just black ink on ivory card stock. At 6 a.m. sharp, Elijah knocked on the heavy green door of the farmhouse at Delaney Acres. A German shepherd barked somewhere in the barn. Margot opened the door wearing a flannel shirt, holding a cup of black coffee. You're early. I figured if I was going to freeze, Elijah said, I might as well be working. She stepped aside. Welcome to Delaney Acres, Mr. Ford. And just like that, the man who was unwanted hours earlier stepped into a place that would change everything. The morning frost still clung to the barn roof as Elijah walked past rows of dormant soil, hands in his jacket pockets, boots sinking slightly into the thawing dirt. Delaney Acres didn't look like a multi-million-dollar operation at first glance. It looked lived in, real, like it had stories buried in the ground alongside the roots. Margot led the way, her strides purposeful. We grow slow here, she said over her shoulder. But when we bloom, it matters. She stopped in front of a wooden gate freshly painted with a small engraved plaque. To those who served, and still do. Beneath it, a hand-drawn map of the property was pinned. You'll be managing this quadrant, she said, pointing to the eastern stretch. Used to be owned by my father's business partner, vacant since he passed. We're converting it into a training ground for returning vets. Agriculture, therapy, financial literacy. You up for that? Elijah nodded, taking in the landscape. Seems like solid ground. It is, Margot said. Then she added, mostly. Inside the main house, the kitchen smelled of apple butter and burnt toast. A wiry older man named Clint, Vietnam vet, retired mechanic, and full-time grumbler, was hunched over the stove with a spatula like it was a wrench. New blood, he muttered without looking up. Elijah Ford, Margot introduced. He'll be running Eastfield. Clint grunted. Long as he knows dirt. Don't care what medals you got. I know dirt. Elijah replied, voice even. It buries us all the same. Clint looked over, eyebrow raised, then gave a single nod of respect. The rest of breakfast was quiet. Just the scrape of forks, the gurgle of coffee, and the low-country radio playing a Patsy Cline tune. Elijah didn't mind. He preferred silence that spoke. What if uncovering his family's past ignites a battle for justice? After the meal, Margot handed him a binder filled with property records, employee lists, and project deadlines. "I don't micromanage," she said. "If I have to check every decision, I hired the wrong person." Elijah flipped through the pages. One section was handwritten. Land history, water rights, boundary changes over the decades. "You keep this kind of detail for all your staff?" he asked. "No," she said plainly. "Just for land that doesn't fully belong to me." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Margot leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "There's been rumors. The Northeast plot, your quadrant. It might have once been part of the Ford estate." Elijah's body tensed. "Ford. Joseph Ford," she said, black rancher born in 1859. "Name comes up in a few old ledgers. Nothing official, but some folks say that land was seized post-World War I through a loophole." Elijah said nothing, but inside a slow burn had started. "Anyway," Margot added, "if you dig anything up, figuratively or literally, let me know. Truth deserves daylight." Later that week, Elijah visited the Colton County Records Office. The building was a low, tan-brick structure with flickering lights and a heater that groaned like it was tired of Wyoming winters. A clerk named Nancy, glasses hanging low on her nose, pulled a series of files marked 4J. Her hands hesitated when she saw Elijah's name. "You're related?" she asked. Elijah nodded, trying to confirm something. She set the box down and stepped away. Most of the documents were faded, typed on yellowing carbon paper. Tax assessments, purchase receipts, deeds. Then he saw it. Deed revocation 1921. Subject, Joseph Ford. Colored land reassigned per Municipal Consolidation Act. No compensation, no formal trial, just gone. Elijah's throat tightened. He wasn't looking for a fight, but the fight had clearly been passed down to him, like the weight of silence in his father's eyes, or the stories his grandmother never told out loud. He copied the file quietly. Back at the farm, Margot found him in the east barn staring at the soil. "You look like a man who found something that shouldn't have been forgotten," she said. Elijah didn't turn. "They stole it. No due process. Just pushed my people off the land and erased the name like it never mattered." Margot exhaled. "Some folks around here still think that was just good business." "Well, I don't," Elijah said. "And I ain't going to let them sleep easy while I know the truth." She handed him a cup of steaming coffee. "Then you'd better be smart about it. This town's got long memories and short tempers." Elijah took the cup, hand steady. "I don't want revenge, Margot. I want restoration." She smiled faintly. "Good, because that kind of justice sticks longer." But not everyone in Colton Creek was ready for restoration. 2 days later, as Elijah returned to the house after dusk, he found a note nailed to the front gate. The paper was damp from snow. The ink smeared. We don't need your kind rewriting history. Leave before history repeats itself. No name, no signature. Just the message. Elijah didn't flinch. He tore the note down, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his coat. Inside the farmhouse, Clint looked up from polishing a rusted shotgun. Trouble? Not yet, Elijah replied. But they're getting nervous. Clint nodded. Good. Nervous men make mistakes. That's when we show them who's really writing history now. And as Elijah stood in the doorway, snow swirling behind him, he felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, not anger, but resolve, like roots pressing deeper into the earth. The ground remembered, and so would he. The cold came early that November, sinking into the bones of Colton Creek like a memory the town tried to forget. Elijah woke before dawn, boots crunching frost-covered dirt as he crossed the east field. He moved with quiet purpose, one hand gripping the old map he'd carefully laminated the night before. A copy of a survey document dated 1894, bearing the name Joseph Ford in fading ink and the signature of a county official who hadn't been seen in over a century. The document had been buried in a mislabeled folder tucked in the far back corner of the county records office behind permit applications and dog licensing forms. Forgotten but not gone. And now the land beneath his feet had a voice again. By mid-morning, Margot found Elijah sitting in the corner of the barn office, surrounded by old farming ledgers and township maps, a worn flashlight clutched in his calloused hand. I didn't sleep, he said simply. Didn't want to. This place, my family, was never supposed to disappear like this. Margot stepped forward, placing a small box on the table beside him. Thought you might want this. Inside, wrapped in linen and cedar dust, was a brass surveying compass, old but functional. The initials JF engraved on the lid. I found it in the attic, she explained. My grandfather bought this land in 1922, but he never talked about how he got it. Just said it came cheap. Elijah's hand hovered over the compass like it was something sacred. It didn't come cheap, Margot. It came stolen. They stood in silence. Then Margot spoke low and even. We take this to the council. If we have the records, the signatures, the lineage, they'll have no choice but to investigate. Elijah shook his head. This town doesn't work that way. They don't care what's legal. They care what's comfortable, and people like me, we make them uncomfortable. Margot stepped closer, voice firm. Then it's time they learn to sit in that discomfort. Word spread, as it always does in towns like Colton Creek. By the end of the week, local whispers had turned into sharp looks, cold shoulders, and one vandalized fence. The sign at Delaney Acres was defaced in red paint. Traders don't farm here. Clint patched the damage without a word, but Elijah noticed the way his jaw clenched tighter than usual. Even the sheepdogs had grown uneasy, pacing more than resting. One morning, Elijah returned from the southern ridge to find a dusty pickup truck parked in front of the farmhouse. Leaning against the hood was Rebecca Hughes. She was dressed in a high AR coat, her hair perfectly curled, her expression somewhere between smug and sheepish. Elijah, she said, arms folded. He kept walking. You lost? I heard about your project, she said, following him. People are saying crazy things. Land seizures, council hearings, lawsuits. He stopped. You didn't care about any of that when you sent me away. Her voice softened. I didn't know who you were back then. No, he corrected. You knew exactly who I was. You just didn't like what you saw. Rebecca winced. Look, I came to warn you. The people on that council, they're not going to roll over. They'll dig through your past, your family, anything they can. They can dig. Elijah said. They'll find roots deeper than theirs. She hesitated. Some people are saying Margot's being manipulated. He turned fully now, eyes like steel. Margot's the first person in this town who didn't look through me. She sees me. And that scares you, doesn't it? Rebecca bit her lip, then turned away. Just be careful. I've been careful all my life, Elijah said. And look where it's gotten me. That night, Elijah sat alone in the barn office. A single desk lamp lit the space. The walls were now lined with scanned records, maps, historical deeds, and newspaper clippings. The latest edition, a photo of Joseph Ford taken in 1910, standing beside a stallion with a hand on his son's shoulder. My great-grandfather. Elijah stared at the picture. In the boy's eyes, he saw his own. The door creaked. It was Clint. Town council's meeting next week, Clint said. Word is they're not going to let you speak. Elijah smiled bitterly. Of course not. Clint scratched his beard. But I can. Elijah raised an eyebrow. I'm not young, Elijah. I'm white. I'm a vet. I've been on that council twice. They'll listen to me even if they pretend not to. Elijah stood. Why would you risk that? Clint's answer came after a beat. Because when I came back from Vietnam, folks told me to hide the nightmares. Pretend nothing happened. And I did for 50 damn years. He looked at the photo on the wall. But you're not hiding. And maybe it's time we stop pretending this town is better than it is. Elijah nodded once. Then let's show them the truth. 3 days later, they stood in the dusty town hall of Colton Creek. The wooden floor creaked under the weight of history. Most of it hidden, some of it still fighting to stay that way. Council members filed in gray hair, suits that hadn't changed style in decades, and expressions carved from old stone. Clint spoke first, then Margot, then Elijah. He presented the documents, the land records, the survey maps, the deed revocation. His voice was calm, measured, but carried the quiet power of generations denied. Joseph Ford wasn't just my great-grandfather, he said. He was the legal owner of the land that now feeds your cattle, your families, your schools. A murmur swept the crowd. I'm not here to take anything away, Elijah continued, but I am here to name what was stolen and to propose something better. He outlined a proposal, the Ford Foundation for Agricultural Justice, a non-profit to restore historically lost land access, starting with the east quadrant of Delaney Acres. No lawsuits, no revenge, just truth and a shared future. One councilman scoffed. You expect us to just give it away? Elijah looked at him dead in the eye. No, he said. I expect you to remember who it belonged to before it was taken. Silence followed. And then, unexpectedly, Councilwoman Rhonda Bailey, a woman in her 70s with a sharp tongue and a sharper memory, spoke up. "I remember my father talking about Joseph Ford," she said softly. "Said he was the best horseman he ever saw. Said he got run off not by law but by fear." Her eyes welled. "Maybe it's time we stop being afraid of the truth." That night, as the snow began to fall again over Colton Creek, Elijah stood under the stars beside the east fence line. Margot joined him, a thermos in her hand. "They'll vote next week," she said. "But I've got a feeling." Elijah nodded slowly. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "we planted something today." She handed him the thermos. "Justice," she said, "doesn't grow overnight. But it always finds the light." He took a sip. Hot coffee warming his chest. Then he turned to face the land. "My grandfather walked this soil," he whispered. "And now I do, too." Colton Creek wasn't a place that changed quietly. The snow melted fast that week, but the tension stayed thick like spring frost that refused to let go. News of Elijah's presentation had spread past the town council. It was in the church bulletins, the barber shops, and whispered between pews and gas pumps. Some folks nodded in approval. Others clenched their jaws a little tighter. But behind every polite smile at the farmer's market or carefully phrased article in the Colton Gazette, there was a question burning. What happens if the vote goes his way? On the morning of the town council vote, Elijah awoke to the sharp bark of the dogs. Something wasn't right. He threw on his boots and jacket and bolted outside. The sky was still dark, tinged with violet. A thin ribbon of smoke coiled into the air from the direction of the east barn. He ran. By the time he reached the structure, flames had already kissed the rafters. Hay crackled. The air stung with smoke and scorched wood. Clint and Margot were already there, buckets in hand, but it was too late to save the barn. They focused on keeping the fire from jumping to the adjacent greenhouse. No one spoke. Not until the blaze was ash and cinders and the frost had returned to the soil. They signed their answer in fire. Clint muttered. Margot turned to Elijah. "Still want to go through with the vote?" Elijah stared at the ruins, jaw tight. "More than ever." At 2 p.m., the town council convened in the old courthouse, a red brick building with a weathered eagle above the door and decades of dust in its rafters. But this time it wasn't just the usual few elders in attendance. The room was full of veterans, farmers, school teachers, teenagers in faded hoodies. Even the sheriff leaned against the back wall, arms folded, watching. The chair of the council, Walter Kendrick, cleared his throat. "We're here to consider Mr. Elijah Ford's proposal regarding the formation of a non-profit foundation for land restoration. Mr. Ford, do you have any final remarks?" Elijah stood. He didn't use notes. "I don't come from money," he said, voice strong. "And I didn't come to take yours. I came to remember something this town forgot. That not all land was gained fair. Some of it was taken from people who looked like me because we were easy to erase." A hush fell. "I'm not asking for reparations. I'm offering reconciliation. But make no mistake, if you vote this down, the records will still stand. The truth won't burn just because you're uncomfortable with it." Then he added quietly, "You already tried fire. All it did was clear space for something stronger to grow. Gasps, some murmurs, and then silence. Walter nodded stiffly. We will deliberate. As the council stepped into chambers, Elijah stepped outside. Margot followed, handing him a bottle of water. You spoke like a man who's not afraid to lose, she said. I already lost too much, Elijah replied. Now I speak like a man who's not afraid to be heard. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the council returned. Walter stood, clearing his throat again. In a vote of 4-3, the council has approved the establishment of the Ford Foundation and recognizes the historic injustice committed against the Ford family. The east quadrant of Delaney Acres will now be recognized as both working land and historic site. Applause erupted. A few boos followed, but they were drowned quickly. Clint slapped Elijah on the back. Told you old dogs like me still gotta bark. But not everyone took the decision as final. That night, Elijah received a call from Nancy, the clerk at the records office. Elijah, someone broke in the archives room. They tried to take the Ford file. Did they succeed? No, she said. I moved it yesterday, locked it somewhere safe. I had a feeling. Elijah closed his eyes, inhaling slowly. Thank you. But Elijah, her voice dropped. This town, it won't just accept this overnight. Be careful. The ground may be yours, but the war isn't over. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the farmhouse. No return address, no postmark, just his name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single page. You may have won the vote, but this land remembers who it belongs to. And it ain't you. Beneath the words, a photo was taped. Elijah standing in front of the council, circle drawn around him in red ink. He showed the letter to Margot, who paled. We need to bring this to the sheriff. No, Elijah said. Not yet. Why? He stared out the window at the east field where new fencing was going up and fresh soil waited to be turned. Because the land is watching, and I want to see me stand tall. Later that evening, Elijah walked the field alone. The stars were high, the wind quiet. He knelt in the dirt, fingers sifting through soil once taken from his bloodline. Soil that had been silenced, burned, threatened. He whispered, You're home now, and I'm not leaving. Then he stood, not as a man afraid of hate, but as a man rooted in truth. The next morning, the sun broke over Colton Creek with an edge to it, casting long, sharp shadows across Delaney Acres. The barn was still a black skeleton on the eastern side of the property. Clint was hammering up fresh boards for the greenhouse wall while Margot flipped pancakes in the kitchen like it was any other Thursday. But Elijah couldn't ignore the weight that had crept into the air, heavy as the ash that still lingered in the soil. Someone had tried to destroy what he'd rebuilt, not just with flames, but with fear. And it hadn't worked. Now it was time to find out who they were. Inside the farmhouse office, Elijah reviewed the photo again, the one from the anonymous letter. His image circled in red, standing before the town council. Behind him in the frame, slightly blurred but unmistakable, was a man seated in the back row. Wide-brimmed hat, clean boots, face tilted just enough to avoid full capture. But Elijah recognized him. Calvin Watts, owner of the county's largest fertilizer distributor, longtime friend of Walter Kendrick, and once upon a time, a man who offered Elijah a friendly warning not to stir up trouble over ancient land nonsense. That conversation had ended with Elijah walking away before his fists answered first. Now Calvin had circled back, this time from the shadows. "Elijah, you can't go knocking on people's doors," Margot warned as he slipped on his coat and stepped off the porch. "I'm not looking for a fight," he said. "I'm just letting him know I'm not afraid of one." He found Calvin at the local co-op standing beside sacks of seed and sipping cheap coffee from a styrofoam cup. "You've been busy," Elijah said calmly, stepping into the aisle. Calvin turned. For a moment, surprise flickered. Then his jaw set. "This ain't your place, Ford." "No," Elijah replied. "It's yours. The place you nearly burned down." Calvin snorted. "You don't have proof." "You think I need proof to know a man like you behind a fire and a threat?" "You left your scent on it, Calvin, just like your daddy did back in 1963 when he helped run my uncle out of Rollins." People started to glance over. Calvin stiffened. "Watch your mouth," he hissed. "You think the council vote changed something? This is my town." Elijah leaned in, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Then why are you so scared of one man with a map?" He turned and walked out, leaving Calvin gripping his cup so hard the coffee spilled down his sleeve. That evening, a silver truck pulled into the driveway of Delaney Acres. The badge on the door read Colton County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Leanne Monroe stepped out, mid-50s, white, broad-shouldered. Her uniform was crisp, her eyes sharper. She knocked once. "I heard about the letter," she said as Elijah opened the door. He nodded. "Did Nancy call you?" "She did, but I was already on my way." "There's talk in town. Calvin Watts has been bragging after a few drinks. Nothing direct, but it's close." Elijah waited. Sheriff Monroe sighed. "Look, I've known Calvin since we were kids. He's a bully wrapped in money and nostalgia. And this town, hell, it's protected men like him for decades. But the vote, that was a crack in the wall." "Then crack it wider," Elijah said. "Make it count." She handed him a folder. Anonymous tip came in this morning. Photos, voice recordings, Calvin bragging about the fire at the diner last week. Laughing. Elijah opened the folder, scanned the transcript, and now we're getting a warrant. He'll be arrested before the weekend. He exhaled slowly. Not relief, just readiness. By Friday, it was done. Calvin Watts was escorted out of his home in handcuffs. The Gazette ran the headline, "Prominent business owner tied to arson of Delaney Acres." Some locals muttered. Some defended him, but others quietly, steadily, began to shift. An elderly man left a pecan pie on Margot's porch with a note. "Sorry for what we didn't stop." The local high school invited Elijah to speak to their senior class about land history. And at the barber shop, someone pinned up a new photo. Elijah standing before the council, not circled in red, but framed in black and gold beside a sign that read, "This is what legacy looks like." That weekend, Elijah took a walk along the eastern fence line. The snow was melting, revealing dark, rich soil underneath. The same soil Joseph Ford once plowed, the same soil Elijah had nearly been chased from. Margot joined him. They walked side by side without words for a while. Then she said, "You think this is over?" "No," Elijah said. "But the rules are changing." She smiled softly. "Your grandfather would be proud." "I think he already is," Elijah said, pointing toward the horizon. "The land never forgot us. We just had to remember it back." They stood in silence as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the east field in gold. Justice hadn't come in one sweeping act. It had come in roots. And roots held. 6 months later, spring returned to Colton Creek. Not just in the form of green shoots and songbirds, but in something deeper, something slower. Like the town itself had exhaled for the first time in generations. The east field of Delaney Acres was no longer a battleground. It was a living memorial. Rows of vegetables sprouted in careful lines. Veterans tilled the soil beside high school students on community service hours. A wooden sign now stood near the entrance, hand-carved and smooth to the touch. The Ford Foundation, land returned, dignity restored, future shared. At the center of it all stood Elijah. Not a symbol, not a martyr, just a man who refused to walk away. That morning, Elijah stood in the modest greenhouse overlooking the property. He was adjusting a ventilation panel when Sheriff Leanne Monroe appeared at the doorway. "Morning, Sheriff," he greeted, brushing his hands off on his jeans. She handed him an envelope. "Thought you'd want to see this." Inside was a court document stamped and notarized. Motion passed. Formal recognition of Joseph Ford's 1894 deed. Title to Eastern Quadrant restored under Federal Historic Trust. Below it, a note from the judge. "Sometimes justice takes 100 years. Thank you for holding the line." Elijah let out a long quiet breath, not of relief, but of respect, the kind reserved for tombstones and oak trees. "Have you shown Margot?" the sheriff asked. "Not yet," he replied. "But I will." She paused. "You know my daddy. He helped chase your uncle out of this town. Never told anyone, not even my mother." Elijah looked up. She continued, "This place made people believe silence was virtue, but it wasn't. It was just permission." Then she tipped her hat and walked out, boots crunching gravel like punctuation. Later that day, Margot stood on the porch with a clipboard in one hand and a cup of iced tea in the other. Elijah walked up slowly, the court envelope tucked under his arm. He handed it to her without a word. Margot read it twice, then lowered it slowly. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew this land knew your name." Elijah glanced at the field where children now ran barefoot through wildflowers planted along the fence. "It always did," he said. The question was whether the town would say it out loud. Margot looked at him, eyes soft. "And now they're listening. Doesn't mean they understand it all yet, but they're listening." She nodded. "That's how healing starts." That weekend, the foundation held its first community harvest. Long tables lined the barn, rebuilt with volunteer hands. Elderly white farmers sat beside black Vietnam veterans, sharing stories over cornbread and collard greens. Clint stood up at the end, thumped his cup on the table, and raised a toast. "To the stubborn ones," he declared, "who don't back down just 'cause it's easier." The crowd cheered. Rebecca Hughes attended too, quiet on the sidelines but present. She brought her mother. She said little, but when she crossed paths with Elijah near the lemonade stand, she offered one sentence. "I was wrong." Elijah nodded. That's where right begins. As twilight settled over the hills, Margot found Elijah sitting alone by the same fence where months earlier a threat had been nailed. Now wild roses grew there. "You still think about it?" she asked. "Every day," Elijah said, not with anger. "Just wait." She sat beside him. The air was warm, laced with the scent of lilac and turned earth. "Sometimes," she said, "justice doesn't look like a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it's just a boy standing where his grandfather once stood and knowing the ground recognizes him." He looked at her, eyes damp but steady. "Justice doesn't bring him back." "No," she agreed. "But it brings you forward." They sat together in silence as the stars blinked awake. In the distance, a child's voice called, "Mr. Ford, you coming back to the table?" Elijah stood, dusted his jeans, and turned toward the barn. "I'm not just coming back," he said. "I'm staying." Long after the fire had faded, the threats quieted, and the votes were counted. One truth remained. The soil remembers, and now so did Colton. If this inspiring journey of resilience and justice moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more uplifting stories on BUP Stories.